Here we go. I'm recording. You're recording. Everybody's recording. Oh man, I saw something about how you could. There was somebody who was talking about why you shouldn't wear masks, and it was because you could catch the coronavirus from yourself. That was like a real article I read.
That sounds like some of the wise counsel I'm seeing on Facebook every once in a while.
No. Oh, it's so terrible. Oh, that's just. Man. It's really hard to catch a disease from yourself, just for everybody. It's like a general rule of thumb.
How much money does it take to solve our technical difficulties?
For me, about $30.
Per month?
No.
Oh, it's like a license.
Yeah, it's an app within the iPod store. So you're all moved in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're moved into the temporary apartment, which is furnished, so all our stuff is basically still up in some warehouse in Spokane. But yeah, we're moved in. We're trying to figure out, like, kind of, we had, like I told you, we'd been thinking we'd just rent at first.
Mm-hmm.
But after kind of this first week being over here, looking at the housing market and looking at interest rates, looking at
You're going to buy, aren't you?
the costs, we're thinking about it.
Okay.
I still need to run the numbers on what the break-even point is for when you're paying interest, when you add up interest and property taxes, and then compare that to how much you're paying in rent, like where the break-even point is there.
Well, I know at this point it's way cheaper to buy a house over here than it is to rent.
Yeah, it's not quite to that. Well, I mean, it depends on what you get, but
Sure.
it's pretty close. But the other thing is, like, what kind of house you're getting. Like, sure, you can get a student living quarters for, like, super cheap.
Okay.
You want to get a house that's, like, suitable for, or more suitable for a family with a kitchen that your wife will actually want to, or you would want to cook stuff in.
A nice save there. Anyway, just that you would want to cook.
Yeah,
That somebody would want to cook in.
Yeah.
It's a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my brother-in-law is getting married here in a month or so, and they're moving into, it's a mobile home. It's not fantastically nice. It's not a dump either, though, but I think they're going to pay $1,800 a month to live there.
Wow. In Vancouver?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not even in it's not even like downtown, or it's kind of near St. John's and 88th, like that area.
Yeah.
It's
Any
not
mobile home here, you knock $1,000 off of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first place that my wife and I rented was $650 a month. It was a tiny one bedroom. It was fine.
Yeah.
It was like $659. They raised it to $1,000 after we'd lived there for a year, and we left, and that was when we moved to the duplex.
Okay.
But yeah, I was a little blown away when I was talking with them, because we had a bad deal with PMI, and we were also paying our insurance and taxes on our house payment, and that was about that much.
But you're also putting equity in. You've also seen appreciation on that value.
Oh, I'm not complaining, especially since we refinanced. We're paying.
No. I'm agreeing with you that you guys had even as expensive as that seemed, you guys had a much better deal than someone who's renting a mobile home, which is really weird to think about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's exactly the same thing we're looking at. And the other thing is the housing market is so tight here. It's like you can't look and then go get approved for a loan and then get something. You basically have to be like approved fully in looking mode, and then things go pending within a week.
Yeah, it's still days. Pretty much the same over here. My coworker's been looking for a house for, I don't know, 2 months or something. I don't know how long exactly. They've put 7 offers down, and often they for the last 2 or 3, they were basically not. They'd offered 10 above, and they came in 4th.
What?
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite that bad here, but
yeah, and typically they would decide to do an offer, but they wouldn't even be able to because there was already a pending sale. Like, they had that experience quite a bit. And I think the only reason that they finally got an approved, or they finally put in an offer, and
they took it.
They took it, and I think a big part of the reason that turned people away is that the house is painted like puke green.
Well, that's hard to solve.
Yeah, that's a difficult problem. Oh, paint. What do we do?
Sketchy foundation, buy it. Puke green paint, not so sure.
Not interested. Yeah, no, it's
People are so funny.
it is. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that I think my wife and I are kind of the same way,
Right.
in that we would just decide to buy the puke greenhouse, but then life gets in the way, and you end up living in a puke greenhouse for a while, unless
Pay someone else to do it.
yeah, essentially, if you pay somebody else to do it, or you've budgeted that in the house sale, you say, okay, we're buying this for, let's use some fun numbers and not where they're actually at. We're going to pay $200 for this house, and we're actually going to end up paying, I think, $210 or...
You know, you actually can get houses over here for $200. They tend to be small, but they'll have a basement, so it's like 2 800 square foot dwelling spaces stacked on top of each other.
That sounds amazing. You cannot get a house for $200 over here unless it is on fire. Like,
Then maybe.
there is a dump of a house that's probably half a mile from our house. And just because of where it's at, I'm sure I would be surprised if it went for less than 200, but it needs to be completely torn down because it's so bad.
Yeah.
But it's Vancouver, and Portland's not that far away, and they've been tearing homes down in downtown Vancouver for years and Portland for years. Feedback?
Ladies do not have different cones in their eyes.
You remember how you were talking about how, well, I said it and you didn't disagree. This was part of the last podcast. This is feedback on our podcast.
Okay. Did we say they have different cones in their eyes?
I did, and you didn't disagree, but they just have more.
Right.
Anyway.
The difference is in the rods versus the cone. I believe men have more rods.
And see, my wife will know exactly, and she'll say, meh. So my wife has listened a little bit to Hello Internet. And she was like, oh, Kyle kind of has more the honey voice like CGP Grey, and you have more kind of like the Brady voice, which is a little more harsh or high pitch. You know, it's just like... So she just... you just have a nice voice. I just thought that was funny.
Well, thank you, Daniel's wife.
I don't know that she would super appreciate me telling you, but I'll tell her that you said thank you.
Well, I'm glad you picked a good co-host for your podcast so that you can continue to emulate your podcasting idols.
Can we not use the word idol?
My whole new job is designing systems that can withstand more heat than you'd expect a computer to take and more vibration than you would ever expect a computer to take.
When you said electricity, this is probably because of where we live. I think of immediately hydroelectricity, but I know lots of places don't use hydroelectricity.
Most places.
Yeah, most places don't. It's why we have so many tech companies up here, because it's cheap.
And there's water. You need two things for servers: water cooling and cheap electricity.
So do they use the rivers to cool the... Oh, that's why all the salmon are dying.
No, seriously. Like, it raises the water temperature because they just...
Oh, I know. I mean, you've got... I mean, I don't know the purpose of the cooling necessarily, but, you know, you're spinning these...
turbines.
I know so little about electricity. It's amazing that
Electricity is generated by spinning very large turbines at very high speed, and so it spins a magnetic field backwards from the way an electric motor would spin, which then produces useful electricity.
So you're essentially, with magic, winding up a wind-up toy and then releasing that, and that's the energy that allows us to record podcasts. Is that...
Yep.
That might be an oversimplification, but...
No, that's a great analogy.
All right. Well, when you're
Seriously.
When you're explaining it to your son in 3 years, you can do that. You can take it. Use it freely.
It's going to have to wait till 3 years for me to explain that to him?
I don't know. Will he be designing computers at that age?
Probably.
You know what? At the rate things are going.
Actually, I mean, computer, yeah. The barrier for entry for coding and basically making useful things with computers is coming down so fast. Yeah, I'd expect him to be able to create some pretty cool things before he makes it into junior high.
Awesome. I have no idea how young children learn things at what ages, so it's not like I think your son is dumb. It's just I'm ignorant.
I was just pulling your leg.
That's okay.
You know that.
I know. Do you want me to laugh for you?
No, that's okay.
Not at this time. Okay.
Don't laugh.
Check.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July, Kyle. How are you doing this morning?
I'm awake on the beautiful Palouse.
Palouse. Are you on a river?
So there is the Palouse River that flows into Palouse Falls, but the Palouse is the general name for the overall region that includes Moscow and Pullman and the rolling hills that are featured on the Windows XP background.
That's where Bill Gates is from, right?
No. Bill Gates is from the east side of Lake Washington. Or no, sorry, he's from Mercer Island. He currently resides on the east side of Lake Washington.
How do you just have all this? It's not even necessarily knowledge, just information about so many different things. Anyway, you're on the Palouse though. You moved over there about a week ago. Now you're all settled in. You moved your family of, we're not going to say how many. It's too many to count.
Well, that goes with the territory.
Yeah, so your first week of working at your new fancy job.
Yep.
And it's the 4th of July. Do you guys have rules of fireworks over there? Or no, not really?
I'm sure there are rules.
My guess is no.
No, I think there are actually pretty strict rules. Whether they're enforced, like most places, is it's not a big thing.
This year, the city of Vancouver hired a security company to go and hand out $500 tickets to everybody in the city limits who is using fireworks.
That's sort of funny because I feel like some people spend so much on fireworks that they would just roll that $500 into their bill for celebrating the 4th.
Yeah, that would not surprise me, especially knowing a handful of people who it seems like I end up spending time with or knowing people who, for whatever holiday, like that's their holiday. So I've been to somebody's house who spends $10,000 or something, and they typically will have like 100 to 300 people over. They own this like field in Vancouver proper, and
right.
they spend the month previous to the 4th. It's essentially a professional fireworks show, but it's just this one guy's hobby.
Yep.
Right? I'm sure that he doesn't buy from the fireworks stands. He knows
buys directly from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure he's not a big deal to those wholesalers, but anyway. And then I've been to somebody's house for Christmas who will spend, the month or something previous. I counted as I was walking through her house, something like 300 Santa Clauses. Her living room. Have you ever seen how there's like you'll put like white felt down and then you'll put a little house.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's probably 100 of those in her living room, and she had built a scaffolding and made this hillside of those houses. It was an entire village. And
did she have kids?
Grown kids, yeah. But she had a 3-car garage. She was married. Her husband was fine with it. Obviously, they had a 3-car garage, and it was entirely filled with Christmas decorations.
Yep.
It was. Anyway, so it's like, and then I feel like I know people that Halloween is their thing, and it's just like, I don't know, yeah, it's interesting. My wife always wants like a few more Christmas decorations, and I'm like, then we need to get rid of some. I don't want to have more than like a few boxes.
Right.
I don't know. Do you guys decorate, or do you get really excited about any of the holidays? I would think no, but
you've seen our decorations.
Oh, I like the way you guys decorate. It's very minimalist.
It was very minimalist.
Didn't you guys for a tree one year just like hang a branch on the wall?
Essentially, my wife did a little bit more than that, but in essence it was branches cut into the shape of a tree that was hung on the wall with ornaments and lights.
See, that sounds nice.
I was telling her she needs to get on Etsy and put some plans together and then just sell the plans for it.
She probably could. That's kind of an interesting segue into, we can continue to talk about the 4th if you'd like, and also an interesting
I want to follow your segue.
Naval podcast talked about creating assets and
yes.
that it doesn't cost anymore to sell one more widget. In this case, plans for DIY Christmas trees.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you? So we both listened to the Naval podcast, How to Get Rich, every episode, which is like
3.5 hours.
Yeah, it was 3.5 hours. The number 342 sticks in my head, but that could be from something else.
No, I think you're right.
Look at me remembering numbers. So proud of myself. Yeah. So you took some notes. Do you want to share that? Or do you want to just, you want to talk about general impressions first?
Maybe let's talk about general impressions. The notes I took were essentially quotes that stood out to me for different reasons, and they could all take a fair amount of time to discuss, potentially. Because they're essentially starting quotes that I thought were good starting points for discussion.
Yeah, so I don't know Naval's first name. I think it's...
It is Naval.
I don't know Naval's last name then. And I think it was something...
Ravikant.
That's the one. I'm not going to try and say it. A very, very high level kind of thought. I think there was a lot of really valuable things that I could pluck out for me. He said this somewhere in the beginning. I named this How to Get Rich, but really it's about wealth creation. That's not near as catchy.
Right. He said it was clickbaity to say how to get rich.
How to get rich, yeah. But the kind of wealth creation that he is interested in making, I am not. And it's not because I think that wealth creation is evil or something along those lines, but I think the kinds of sacrifices that he is willing to make and has been willing to make, I am not.
Right. And it was interesting. He acknowledged that later on. One of the quotes I have, or paraphrases I have from him, is that physical, mental health, and relationships are worth more than money.
Yeah, he says that kind of towards the end.
Higher form of wealth.
I think he even says that once you've created wealth, you'll realize it's not all you need, or it's not what you want.
Right. He said he'll realize it's not what you want.
And I would just rather, I'm not going to say he derided or mocked lifestyle businesses. He just said that wasn't what he wanted.
And he had a point as to why. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Okay, so the point he made is that ultimately to run any business, it requires a lot of your attention and a lot of time. And whether it's, I think he used the example of Tesla or 3 Italian restaurants, which obviously restaurants are in a bit of a pickle right now, but even outside of everything that's impacting restaurants right now, the amount of time it takes you to run, like you as an individual to run 3 Italian restaurants, is about the same as the amount of time it takes you to run Tesla or a similarly large company. The difference is how much revenue the different things are bringing in, so how much money you have available to purchase other people's time to delegate to them.
Do you think he's right?
Maybe not on the Tesla side of things, although running a restaurant, from what little I know, does take quite a bit of time.
I think it depends on the kind of restaurant that you're trying to make. Because I know there's this sandwich shop in downtown Vancouver. And the same person has owned it for a long time.
Right.
She knows what she wants. She's not trying to grow the business. She is open from 11 to 3, something like that.
Right.
She doesn't do dinner. She does lunch, and that's it.
Right.
And caters.
Okay.
And and it's just those are the things that she does. I think that if you're trying to whatever she's doing is working for her. And I honestly don't think that she works 80 hours a week. I also know, I think if you're trying to start a business and you're not 100% sure what your value is, and you're trying to figure that out, it's kind of like when I was starting that business doing Excel stuff.
Right.
I was willing to basically do anything, and so I did a lot of things that I was not particularly efficient at, and I learned a lot, but I also spent a lot more time than I needed to figuring out and this is a phrase that Naval used, which was, felt like play to me but work to others.
Yep.
And there was the things that I did not as well or poorly, I felt like work to me and felt like work to others. And they were just straight delegating unpleasant tasks. Whereas certain things with Excel, it was like playing a piano.
Right.
To sound like a total geek. But that's fine.
But that's what gave you your unique advantage. Or gives you your unique advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you can find something that feels like play and people are willing to pay you to do it, it's not always going to feel like play, but it may a lot of the time. And that's, work it.
It will help you develop the passion necessary to push through those times when it doesn't feel like play.
Yeah, man. I was listening to it was a Farnham Street blog, and it was talking about how...
Okay.
It's talking about the difference between, and it's actually a book we may go through in book group. I liked the author, and he was talking with, I think it's Shane Parrish, I think is the author of Farnham Street, but the book is called Tiny Habits.
Okay.
And he was talking about how you can, what was the word he used? It was essentially that motivation and competency our partners, and compensatory. That was the word that he said he spent 10 years or 8 years or something trying to figure out where you're highly motivated and unskilled, you can push through and do that thing. And if you're highly skilled and not very motivated, it's so easy that you can just do the thing. And it's like this slider scale to where, as long as those two things meet, as long as you're not very low skilled and very low motivated, like you're not going to do that thing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
That makes total sense, and I've seen that in other places.
Yeah, and so he even talked about how if you're trying to instill a habit and you're low skilled and low motivated, you need to make the habit much tinier, and even to do kind of a self-check each day to say, how motivated am I to do that? Let's say that you're trying to do a workout, you're trying to instill a workout routine, let's just say.
Okay.
At the beginning of the day, you might
check in on yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Check in, say, how motivated am I? How skilled am I? So you, Kyle, are more skilled at, you're much more body intelligent than I am. Like you know how to move. You just are.
Except when I dislocate my shoulder. But yeah.
Yeah, I have a slight advantage because I'm not as physical in general, so I don't dislocate things. I know where everything is. But yeah, so you could check in to see, on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how motivated am I to do this physical thing? And if you're at a 1, maybe you go for a walk. And if you're at a 10, you're like, I'm going to max out on pull-ups and deadlifts until I can hardly move. Or, I don't know. That's probably a poor example. That tracks with you?
The until you can hardly move. I think I got distracted by the until you can hardly move thing, which...
Well, okay, fine. Not until you hardly move, but you could... I think that there is a max reps thing that you could do when you're working out where you have a max weight and you can only do 2 or 3 of those weights correctly.
Right.
I guess that's what I'm thinking. And he would say maybe don't, while you're trying to build a habit, while you're trying to build competency and instill a habit, don't try that if you're at a really low motivation.
Don't overrun your energy.
Yeah, and that's an interesting. When I've heard people talk about motivation, I have heard them talk about how it's a depletable resource.
Right. Yes.
But I think that and this is another thing that they talked about, was there's kind of a motivation wave, and you'll feel more motivated and less motivated, and more, depending on how you slept and what you've been eating, and all the different things that kind of are difficult to quantify.
But getting more easy to quantify with technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about how helpful or unhelpful that is.
Because you've actually spent some time doing that, at least on the eating side of things. Mm-hmm. So I am sort of curious. I'm not sure exactly where this fits in with what we had planned to talk about, but since we're on the topic, I am curious if you, as you were journaling and also essentially food journaling, if you came away with some helpful takeaways that have led to principles for how you eat based off of what you learned about correlations between the food you were consuming, when you were consuming it, and how you felt, what your peak and motivation waves were, and how long your motivation waves lasted.
I'd say in general, my motivation waves last probably a month for different things. It's easier to get traction with physical things than it is with emotional or mental pushes.
Do you think that's because we can see the outcome?
Yeah, probably.
Like, you can see a house getting framed. You can't necessarily see a database getting put together.
You can, if you know what you're looking at. I think you can see a database getting put together.
Okay.
But as far as unless you're talking about an emotional database or again, things that are very qualitative as opposed to quantitative. Is that what you're getting at?
That's fair. Yeah, I probably should have gone more with the emotional side of things.
Yeah, they're just unrelational. Emotional, relational, those are much more difficult to get a grip on. Some of the things that I came away with is that figuring out your calorie intake. One, I know that this is not a health-oriented necessarily way to look at things, but your weight is a function of how much you move and what calories you intake, regardless of how you intake those calories, whether it be butter, fried chicken, or veggies. And that may not be true, but that's generally true.
So this is actually kind of what I was getting at with my question about the motivation waves.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were thinking more about basically how long over time a motivation wave is lasting. I was thinking more about in a particular day when you are most motivated, you have the most energy to do a task, and how that relates to what you're eating. Because if you eat a stick of butter, I would be willing to bet that your energy for tasks
is high,
is going to be lower than if you ate the same calories of chicken and rice, for example.
Maybe. I know that I in a day I have the most motivation
Right.
early afternoon, which is frustrating to me because I naturally wake up at like 6.
Okay.
I have to do low energy things in the morning, and then things start to pick up. And
Do you skip lunch?
3 days a week I skip lunch.
Do you find that those 3 days a week are higher motivation early afternoon, or no change?
No change off the top of my head, but that is something that I can take a look at.
I'm just wondering because I can't remember if it came up in Naval's podcast, but I was listening to actually Rogan interview Henry Rollins, who is actually a heavy metal rocker. Rollins pointed...
That's interesting that you decided to download that Joe Rogan podcast, because I definitely don't download all of his.
Or listen to it.
Yeah, listen rather.
I was listening to it on YouTube, but...
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't remember what drew me to that particular podcast. Oh, I think it may have been... There was probably a different podcast where that guy came up, and I thought, he would be interesting to listen to. And he was very interesting to listen to. One of the biggest takeaways from that podcast for me that relates to what we're talking about right now is he said that when he really wanted to get something done, he would skip whatever meal came before that task, or he would work through that meal. He would essentially fast food-wise so that he could have 100% of his energy directed towards the task at hand and none of the energy going towards digesting food.
That kind of tracks with what you're totally focused on the hunt, and you wouldn't be
right.
You wouldn't have eaten because you need to
right.
capture the wildebeest or whatever.
Of course, there's a careful balance there where you can't go too long without eating, or else you'll become very bad at hunting.
That is true, but I think that's like 3 days. I think anything beyond that,
depending on the output of energy.
Yeah, I guess. I guess I have a little bit of extra energy that I have, tucked away for emergencies, and where, I'm wondering if we're talking about like that long a term. You are, I have just said, more physically fit than I am, but you think like on a scale of like 3 days, because I have some packed away energy, that I would do better in like a long distance thing if it was like you couldn't eat.
I think you may be right, assuming your body could slip into ketosis without just smashing you.
Oh, I know it can, because I've done that.
Okay. So as long as you have that ability, then I think you're exactly right that you could last longer in an endurance event. Which is interesting that you bring that up, because the situation I was thinking of that I'd read about where a lack of food actually hampered an army was in a book called Why the West Has Won, and it was this particular section was detailing the Boer War, when you had, I can't remember if it was South Africa or Zimbabwe or which African area it was in, but the British were down there and fighting one of the major African tribes down there for Queen and country, essentially. And this one British convoy got way out of position and ended up it was basically a Custer's last stand situation.
Gotcha.
Where I can't remember if it was the Maasai or which tribe it was, surrounded them and just overran their position. And really none of the soldiers made it back. But then there was another outpost that some of the British soldiers had made it to. That was just this little field hospital, basically. And they had enough time to set up a perimeter, and just enough time to set up a perimeter and sort of fortify this little field hospital, which was in a valley of all places, which is a terrible place to defend. And to add to the scene, the commander of this little field hospital had been written up by his superiors for being not worthless, but pretty close to worthless. in their eyes.
Like as a coward, or just in general?
Not as coward, just he was very unremarkable,
Ah,
basically. But he just followed procedure and fortified the place, made sure that their ammo supplies were in a very easy place for everyone to access. And as the African army, which was full of very experienced fighting men, came over the hill, they charged in, and the British soldiers, the small contingent of British soldiers, ended up holding off this whole army until the African army that had been running around fighting for over 24 hours at that point, between taking out the convoy and then going in it and attacking this place. They've been going for 24 hours without food, and they essentially just ran out of energy to continue attacking the little field hospital. And that ended up being the turning point actually in the war, because they lost so many of their men trying to take this little field hospital commanded by this unremarkable captain in the British army.
that's fascinating.
And I mean, and so the thing that really pertains to our conversation is just how the African army that was trained to run like long distances and fight, they had been going long enough, exerting themselves, that they didn't have the energy to physically continue the attack.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be any better off in that situation than you, right next to me. Maybe I would, because just because of what we've already said, but there's a good chance. I think there's a different kind of energy. Like if you and I were essentially like lone hunters chasing a deer, and we had to chase it for 3 days, like we've said, that's a different kind of energy than charging a hill or charging a fortified position.
Right.
There's a
different energy system.
Yeah, and it's even like fast twitch, slow twitch kind of. I wonder if you perform one better than the other when you're depleted, or you're running off of stores. I kind of want to move on into I can give you an update of where I'm at in the Lord of the Rings.
That sounds good. I'm curious as to where you're at.
I've almost
you're seeing.
Yeah, so I've almost finished the Fellowship of the Ring. Gandalf has just sacrificed himself.
Right.
For the good of the party, or company is how Tolkien refers to him.
Yes.
And yeah, it's really good. I haven't read a fictional book in a while, like visually. I usually have listened to them. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that. Tolkien's a very good writer. I don't know what was wrong with me in the past that I had a hard time with it. Although I have heard Tyler complain about how Frodo gets kind of whiny, I think, in the second book, and that's not as fun.
Huh.
But it's been pretty fast paced.
I feel like he got way more whiny in the movie than he actually was in the book.
Yeah, no, and I'm fine with that. There's like a handful of things that I have thought about how Tolkien is moving the story along.
Oh, interesting.
Without dialogue. Yeah, so I read it from that perspective as well. And I kind of know that, and this is from watching the movies, and maybe I should try to get this out of my head, but I'm kind of looking for signs of a kind of betrayal.
Right.
And I can see, I don't remember the actor's name who played Boromir, but I'm like watching out for that.
Sean.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's Sean. You gotta try to remember it.
I may be confusing that with Sam's character.
Yeah. I don't think that it's like I don't think Frodo, Elijah Wood has been in like anything since Lord of the Rings.
He has, but it hasn't been anything good.
Okay. Fair enough. But yeah, it's I'm really enjoying it. I don't remember anything from the Mines of Moria related to the dwarves from the book The Hobbit, but that was obviously in the Fellowship, like in the book. Does that make sense? So specifically about...
In the movie, they don't reference Balin.
Yeah, Balin, that's it.
Well, they sort of do, because they come up to the tomb, and that's the kind of climax, or the start of the climax scene in the movie, is when they come to the tomb and they make that last stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Boromir comes back and they've got a cave troll. That sort of thing. Which is, that whole sequence is far more extended in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think that was one of the things the movie did really well, actually, was the way they condensed that section and made it far more visually stimulating.
Yeah, and I just, like in the book, you can pass through time in a sentence, or you can drag minutes out into paragraphs. Like,
Right.
You have time is way more flexible because it is in our memory, right?
Mhm.
If not very much has happened, part of why it feels like February was so long ago at this point is because so much has happened, in real life.
Right.
Whereas maybe the previous 6 months to that, there was some significant things, but I probably remember 3 significant things from previous to February to September. There just wasn't, in my life, there just wasn't a ton. Especially not
Right.
that was in the zeitgeist.
The cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, the cultural zeitgeist. So that's in the book. They're in the Mines of Moria for days and days.
Yes.
I think that, and they're in Rivendell for months.
Yep.
Right? And I think that Tolkien does a really good job of stretching and compressing time as needs dictate for him for the story. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I'm looking forward to the Two Towers. That's next.
Yep.
And the Return of the King is last. And then on to the Silmarillion. No, probably not.
Which I actually haven't read all of that yet.
Well, that's because it's not the same at all. I think it was more of a reference book for Tolkien.
I did read that section of the Silmarillion.
Is there an actual story in it?
There's an actual very poetic story. It's about the creation of Middle-earth. In the back, they just have the history of Middle-earth, which I was able to get into that whenever I read it. But I was not able to get into the poetry section, which I think had to do with me being a junior high boy. And so
I don't understand.
Chronological record of all the battles and kingdom changeovers and that sort of thing were far more interesting to me than poetry.
Because of the violence?
Probably. Well, I was also reading a lot of military history at the time and just historical charts of when, especially World War II, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and then how that related to the attack on the Philippines, which then led to us regrouping, going to Guadalcanal, the Battle of Midway, and then working our way up the Pacific.
Have you ever seen that chart of Napoleon's march to Moscow?
Yes.
That's a fantastic. I don't know, for whatever reason, while you were talking about that, it made me think of it.
Yeah, that was actually presented to me by a guy who is heavily involved with Nike's internal marketing. So they don't just market externally, they market internally, like I think all good companies should, to instill corporate culture. And this guy had attended some talks by a professor from Princeton at the time. I don't know if he's still alive at this point, but this guy at Princeton had emphasized, it was Edward Sharp, not Edward Sharp, Edward Tufte was the guy from Princeton, and he had created a syllabus for seminars on how to effectively present visual information. And that's one of kind of the classic examples of an effective presentation of visual information, because you have the size of Napoleon's army depicted in chronological time and based on geographical locations.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing little graphic. We'll have to put that a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a big deal. You just search Napoleon's march chart, and I bet it would come right up.
Yeah. You could also add Edward Tufte's stuff.
Edward Tufte. Yeah, we'll get together on what is going in show notes and what isn't.
Sounds good.
I think pretty much everything that we reference will, if there's a place for it, then we'll link to that, because that's how SEO works, right?
Yep.
Maybe not.
Partially.
I don't know. Yeah, okay. I don't understand how computers work. One of the things I had wanted to talk about was billable hours.
Yeah.
And it kind of backfired on me, actually. I was thinking about it this week, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I went through these different kind of areas, as a husband, as a Christian, as a man. And the reason I have that third category is there were things that it's like, just as a human, like, what do I, taking care of my house, taking care of myself.
Right.
Like these are not particular to being a man, but particular to just me. And I basically ended up making this list of things that I felt were high value things. And some of them worked together really well, and some of it was just creating a list of, here's the things I need to do to feel valuable or successful. And then,
interesting.
Because I couldn't do all of them, I ended up feeling garbagey and had had a bit of a moment earlier this week, and it was interesting. I talked to my wife about it, and she was like, well, that doesn't seem as helpful as you made it sound. But I think the question, I found a way to not answer the question basically, but as a, to give people kind of a framework for billable hours. So you are an engineer and you have to answer emails as part of your job. Your boss says, hey Kyle, I need you to do this thing, or I need something from you. And you say, sure, here's the answer, or I can do this then. Is that somewhat accurate?
Right. I'm not sure if we want to go into this yet, but circling back to Naval's podcast, one of his points is, and others have made this point as well, is we want to try and think about areas of our lives that create value beyond what we're just doing in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So we should try and look for areas of time leverage where an act.
Well, before we go there, I would like to have a framework for billable hours.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can use a different example. We can use an example that you and I talked about earlier this week.
Okay.
As an engineer, you are not being paid to set up your voicemail, not particularly.
Right.
Like, that's not why they hired you, but that is something that you had to do this week.
Right.
So, in your job, in your different so you're not being paid to do that thing, but it is something that you need to do. So the idea of billable hours is, what are you doing that is the most valuable, at your work? Like, why were you hired, or what value are you providing outside of the initial moment? Is that kind of what you were getting at, or kind of what you understood?
I think so. I think kind of taking the example of getting my voicemail set up, that activity is actually, there is an element to that where that one 15-minute act leads to the creation of an asset which is then useful to me and others at work because I put in that 15 minutes. So there is value that's created that gets to be used long term, which is why it was worth doing in the time.
Okay. So do you think that should count? I mean, using what we've already talked about, or even just the framework of billable hours, you would count that because it creates long-term value?
Right. You're trying to focus on what is it that I was actually hired to do. What value do I bring to the company that other people at the company don't have, or what void am I filling?
Sure.
Specifically.
I think also if you think of...
what am I delivering?
Yeah, what am I delivering? Like, if you're a lawyer, your billable hours, it's pretty clear what you're being, fairly clear anyway, what you're being paid to do.
So as an engineer, I can tell you that what I'm being paid to do is I'm being paid to create documentation, in essence. So that documentation includes 3D and 2D CAD models that I can send to suppliers to produce parts.
Okay.
It's documentation on tests that have been completed and passed, and how much margin was, so how much space was there between what the test was rated for and when the device actually failed. So having that documentation stored in a place where managers and product owners can, we call the people who are managing the particular product's development, the product owner, where they can look and verify that the device that they're going to be shipping will actually meet the customer's needs.
That's so interesting.
And then on top of that, the documentation for the actual work instructions for how the parts that I sent out the 2D and 3D files for will be assembled, and I work with other engineers on how to actually do that. But those are three areas of documentation that I am responsible to produce.
Yeah, and that's your primary like job function is the documentation.
Yes.
That is not at all what I had in my mind for what you did. And maybe I'm thinking in just a different way, but it's the same thing.
I'm wondering if that's the case. What are you thinking? And then, yeah.
Gosh, I'm trying to, yeah, huh. So I guess I was kind of thinking of new product development if I was going to put it in a single phrase like that. Or,
Right.
Right. Designing parts.
How do you define what that new product is, though? How do you define what those parts are?
Documentation.
Exactly.
Huh. I guess I just wouldn't have. Yeah, I wouldn't have talked about it the way that you just did. But that's your bread and butter. So you're gonna use language that engineers know and use day in day out, whereas I'm not. But it's interesting to hear you talk about those tests and different things, because I look at that stuff all the time when I'm looking at specifications for the different
ratings on pipe and
yeah. So more recently it's been mechanical and plumbing and electrical stuff, although I know with the electrical stuff I'm just like very ignorant, but I'll still look at the tests to verify that either the ASTM standard has been met or is at least mentioned.
Right.
And if it's a different ASTM standard, I don't know enough about those standards in order to say this standard is more strict than this standard. And so I say to the subcontractor who knows his business better than I do, does this meet? And is this, or did you send me the wrong product or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. That's interesting. So you take this idea of billable hours, and it's easier with when you're actually being paid to do something. But to answer the question, as a husband or as a father or as a Christian, like the idea of money exchange in those kind of areas I just mentioned is like ridiculous, right? A little bit. But
well, it's time exchange.
Sure. But, there's a lot of things that we do that we are necessary. I think have you ever, I don't know who came up with this framework, but just the important versus urgent. So there's important, not important, urgent, non-urgent. And if you make a 2x2 matrix.
The Eisenhower matrix.
Yeah, did Eisenhower do that then?
He was one of the people who popularized it. My guess is he did not actually come up with it, but.
The Eisenhower matrix then.
Mm-hmm.
What is in the important, not urgent category for yourself as a husband, as a father, as a Christian, as a man?
Right.
Because you're not being, it's not necessarily that you don't always get to do that good thing or that best thing, because there are urgent things that are important, but those usually get done because they're urgent, right?
Well, and that's one of the things that the Naval podcast actually talked about, was how do you take those urgent, or put more urgent things into the not important category and delegate or outsource them.
Delegate or disregard.
Delegate or disregard them so that you can give the attention that those urgent, important, or just important things deserve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one thing as a Christian that is, it hits two of the things that are not, it's important, not urgent, is something you and Tyler have both done recently, or I got the idea from you and realized that was missing, but doing worship with just me and my wife.
Right.
And that's been really helpful, but it's not an urgent thing. In fact, we missed twice this week. We had other things come up and I did a bad job, which it's not going to make the house burn down, but if we miss 2 weeks in a row or something, or one more time in a row, it becomes, it's a habit that we have to then again, rebuild.
Right. And I would encourage you that we don't do it every night, but at the same time, like James Clear points out, we try not to miss 2 in a row.
Yeah, well, I didn't start out planning to do it every night. I plan to do it Sunday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay.
I'm thinking that Friday night is not a fantastic night to have, if you're going to start out.
Yeah. Okay, so the one thing I would say, though, is if you have people over at your house,
mm-hmm.
include them in it.
Yeah, and I had even thought, we tried to do a social distance dinner with some close friends.
Uh-huh.
They live in Podunk, the middle of nowhere. It took us almost an hour to get there, and this is not any David's. Anyway.
Podunk, middle of nowhere. It sounds high risk for the virus.
I mean, I don't think that they've seen anybody in 3 months except for their 2 of their kids, and well, their daughter and son-in-law, and their other daughter lives in Texas, so I don't think that they've seen her. I do not remember what was I talking about? Shoot.
You were talking about going up there, and we were talking about family worship.
Oh, yeah. I had considered on the way, I was thinking, asking them if they would be interested in doing that because they love the Lord.
Yeah.
But then I didn't. I forgot. And so, yeah, so I just missed it.
Small steps.
Yeah, small steps. I don't think there's any value really in beating myself up over it, but
totally.
Maybe we'll do that this evening, and we'll do 2 back to back. We'll do Saturday, Sunday, in order to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah, I do think it kind of falls into that category. Remember, James Clear in Atomic Habits was talking about the guy who was trying to build up the habit of going to the gym. He'd just go to the gym for 2 minutes. Go to the parking lot, walk in, step on a treadmill, step off the treadmill, walk back out, get in his car, drive away. And
it sounds like his competency and motivation were both low at that point, and so he lowered the habit into something that he could accomplish and had the desire to, or the motivation to do.
Right, and that's where I think it's worth just saying, hey, we're going to read a verse, and we're just going to sit down, read a verse, and then get up and do that like every day.
That's an idea. I'll have to consider that. I don't see any issues with that.
I mean, obviously you need to talk this over with your wife too. Make sure she's on board.
No. I'm the boss.
But you are responsible. Yes.
No, I think that is. The thing is,
which is a scary thing.
Oh yeah. I was thinking about that recently. As like, as a Christian, there is a different responsibility on me and a different responsibility on.
Right.
In some ways, I think she actually has the harder responsibility.
You're going to have to develop that, because loving someone as Christ loved the church, I'm not sure how you get harder than that.
In a disagreement, if I make a decision that I legitimately believe is the best choice, let's just say, and my wife believes that it is not the best choice.
Yes.
She is called, I think, and disagree with me if you want, I'd be curious. I think she is called to follow my lead.
Absolutely.
And at least in our culture right now, that is, I think for her, very hard.
Very countercultural.
Very countercultural, very difficult, especially since we are not in a small town. Or, our culture is Portland, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, I might even say anti-conservative area. Clark County, not as much.
So question, if you end up being wrong, who has to take responsibility for that?
Oh, me, definitely.
If she ends up being wrong and you guys go with your decision, who takes responsibility for that? Is there any responsibility to be taken?
The thing is I wouldn't take any joy in being right in that situation.
Would you even think about that?
No, because I just want what's best for her.
But if you make the wrong decision, what happens?
I bear the burden for that.
Right.
But I'm used to that.
But I think that's where the difficulty, the increased difficulty comes for men. And maybe I'm discounting the culture side of it too much.
Maybe not. Yeah, that's
I'm just thinking of it as far as who bears the risk.
But in many ways, like I'm made to do that. I am used to doing that in my work, and I'm used to having difficult conversations with a lot of people and holding men and being held by other men to bear the burden of bad and good decisions.
Right.
And I don't know that my wife is able to practice. I don't know that anybody at this point has an area of practice where they submit to decisions that they think are really poor, except for maybe our employer-employee relationships.
Right.
And you're kind of being paid to, you're being paid to do that. Whereas And I also want to say that I'm speaking in ideals, and in that I know that in many ways I fall flat on my face, and the $30 is probably some of the best money I've spent on this project so far.
Can I square you 15?
No, I didn't discuss it with you. Did you I made a decision and we didn't discuss it, so now it's my money. If you try to square me 15, I'm gonna reject it. Just FYI.
Can I square your wife 15?
She doesn't have a square.
Oh.
Ha. Tricked you.
I'll have some random person square you like $15.
Well, whatever. So the microphone I've had for I bought 2 years ago at this point, or a year and a half ago.
Uh-huh.
So to count that.
Well, we both got our own microphone.
I know, but you bought it specific. I can say words. Hold on. You bought it specifically for this project.
Right.
And I didn't.
You also, the reason I would be fine going in half and half with you on Ferrite is because it's not just making your life easier, it's also making my life easier because of how easy it makes editing the podcast for you.
Do you know what would make my life easier?
What?
If you bought a stand and a pop filter.
Okay, I'll go spend $15 on that.
At least. I think it'll cost you more.
The guy I bought the mic from said it only cost $15.
Dude, do it. In it to win it. And I really do think if you wear just a face mask. Are you wearing any PPE right now, by the way? Because I've got gloves, goggles, mask on.
Good for you.
There's a fly in my room and it's just bothering the crap out of me. I may have to get away from, I may have to go kill it before I can continue. I will let you know. Let me start again. I got it.
I heard. Well done.
Sorry. I'm sorry. You can start again and I'll just cut that part. I'm just so proud of myself.